Before I even say anything, I just wanted to thank all of you for the incredible response to my previous video. Reading all of your comments and seeing so many people subscribe, not to mention the fact that Cory himself tweeted it out, was just amazing. I really do appreciate each and every comment, like and subscription. In terms of the road plan, I originally wanted to go back and review the other games in the series, but the game director Cory has actually been quite forthcoming with information about the new God of War over on Twitter, so I thought I would take a look at some of his tweets in these next few videos. I also want to elaborate a bit more on some of the things that I said in my previous video and go over the stuff that I had to cut out of it. This video will be the first part of 3, and I'll be uploading the second part at the same time since they are both very heavily connected. So I wanted to get started by correcting a mistake that I made in my previous video. While the Draugr aren't completely original, the reasoning behind their existence kind of is. They were described as the embodiment of the lost souls of warriors that weren't selected by the Valkyrie to go to Valhalla, but they didn't go to Helheim either. Valhalla was only for the most distinguished warriors, and Helheim was where normal people were sent to, so it makes sense that there were these soldiers that were left behind. The less distinguished warriors would actually go to Folkvanger in Norse mythology, but I don't think it exists in this universe, and we'll get onto this a bit later. As a result, they were forced to wander the earth as these very bitter, violent warriors. Another important thing to note is that some of them could actually increase their size and weight, so it isn't unreasonable to assume that there might be bigger versions of them out there among the normal ones that we saw in the demo. Other than that, everything else that I have said so far still stands. So the first tweet that I wanted to discuss was this one right here. John Boy DC Comics asks, will we see God of War at Paris Games Week or this year at all? To which Cory then says, no, too much work to do, sorry. Apparently they are completely focused on developing the game as of right now, which explains his response. I think people underestimate how long it takes to make the sort of demo that gets shown off at conferences. I remember reading somewhere that it can take up to 6 weeks. If you want to see just how stressful it can be for developers in the lead up to E3, you can watch the third part of the God of War 2 behind the scenes documentary on YouTube. So instead of devoting that time to a demo, they could be putting it into developing the game that you'll actually get to play for yourself when it eventually comes out.
It's incredibly daunting knowing that the entire team is pushing themselves really hard and everybody's, staying late, putting in lots of overtime and really putting everything they have into this demo.
The events that transpired in the E3 demo were actually very specific to it, meaning that what we saw won't happen beat for beat when you get to that point in the game yourself. That's not to say that the game will be any less impressive, it's just to say that what happens on the hunt that Kratos and his son go on is going to be very different, as Cory outlined in an interview. In the real thing, the hunt will take a different route by setting up the reason for Kratos and his son to go on the expansive journey that the developers have been teasing. So they chose to alter the hunt in a way that it could tell a story in its own right, with a beginning, a middle and an end, to give us an idea of the bigger picture of what they want to achieve, so to speak. In doing so, they were probably also able to hide key story details. At its core, the demo was about the development of his son and the way Kratos' influence changes him, which is what the entire game will essentially be focusing on. Throughout the demo, it seems like they have quite an impersonal relationship, but this makes sense considering that it's supposed to be at the beginning. This would also explain why some people seem to think that he isn't his biological son, but we'll get to that in the next video. Going back to Cory's response about not showing any more of the game for the rest of the year, it is very possible that he was only responding to the first question about it not being at Paris Games Week. Paris Games Week is typically reserved for Sony's European studios, so I was never really expecting God of War to make an appearance there anyway. When he was asked about PSX more specifically, he said that he doesn't know and that they have a huge amount of work to do, so he hasn't flat out denied it being at PSX just yet. There is a distinct chance that we might not even see anything substantial from them until next year's E3. I can imagine it being a giant action set piece that proves that the series still hasn't abandoned its roots. If they were to show more footage at PSX, I wouldn't expect it to be another gameplay demo, but hopefully we can get an early look at one of the cutscenes since they've been busy filming quite a few scenes lately. Maybe they can reveal Odin or Loki for the first time as well. What exactly happened at the end of God of War 3 is still quite the mystery. though it was confirmed by Cory that the way Kratos survived to the ending will eventually be explained. I think it'll either be in some sort of prologue or done through a flashback. But I hope that we get a bit more info beforehand, even if it's brief, about what happened when Kratos disappeared, as it's still kind of weird for some fans to see him walking around after stabbing himself with a giant sword. We only really have 3 hints so far. The first was when Cory said that the end of God of War 3 leads to a series of events that directly tie the stories of the past games together to Kratos' new adventures in Norse mythology. The fact that he said a series of events implies that it's not as simple as him ending up in Scandinavia, and that a series of very important events happened first that led to him getting there. In an interview with the GOW, he said that Kratos was wandering alone for a very long period of time before he even got to the lands of Norse myth. For all we know, hundreds of years might have passed between the events of God of War 3 and what we saw in the demo. The third hint comes from an interview on the website VentureBeat, where it is said that Kratos finds out that he'll be walking the earth forever. As I said in my previous video, this may have been the result of a curse that Athena placed on him as punishment for giving her power away to the world. I'm sure that from her perspective, death would have been too peaceful a route for him to take, so in making him immortal, he would still have to deal with the consequences of his past actions. Speaking of Athena, it was confirmed that no one has heard from her in the many years that have passed since the events of God of War 3. The main Greek element in this Norse world will be Kratos, so I don't think she'll show up in any of the upcoming games, although there is a small possibility. We'll probably only see her in the prologue when they explained what happened at the end of God of War 3, and that'll be it. I don't know about you guys, but I'm personally kind of glad about this because I didn't really like the way that she was handled to begin with. Her immortality was shoddily explained and her motivations were never really clear either. She talked about delivering some sort of message to mankind, but we had no idea what she meant by this and will likely never find out. I would have preferred to see another character take on her role, whether they were completely original or inspired by Greek mythology, as it just made her character unnecessarily muddled in my opinion. They kind of teased the idea that there are these more powerful otherworldly forces out there with all of the talk of a higher existence, but I don't think Athena was the right character to explore this with. Unless they can make the lore about how she came to be sound intriguing, I think they are better off leaving her out of future installments. It is safe to say that after the events of God of War 3, none of the Greek gods will be making an appearance in the later games. It does raise a few question marks over what's happened to gods like Artemis and Apollo since they were never featured in it, but I think it's because they were already dead long before the events of that game. Unlike Apollo, who was only seen as statues and in murals, Artemis actually showed up in the original God of War when she spoke to Kratos about giving him her blade, so I can see why some people wonder about what's happened to her more specifically. Their birthplace, the island of Delos, was also featured in God of War Ascension. In Greek mythology, there was already a bit of tension between them and Olympus when Hera kept trying to get rid of their mother Leto by sending monsters to assassinate her. Apollo and Artemis were, after all, the result of an affair that Zeus had with their mother. Zeus also killed Apollo's son Asclepius because he had the power to bring back the dead, which Hades didn't like as he was worried that this would result in less dead spirits coming to the underworld. Apollo then retaliated by killing the Cyclops that made the thunderbolts, which would be used to kill his son, and this angered Zeus. A series of events like these could have led to Apollo and his twin sister becoming estranged from Olympus, as she would no doubt take Apollo's side with them both being twins. This in turn could have led to them getting killed by Zeus. Apollo's legendary bow was also found in the possession of Pirithous in the underworld in God of War 3, which also suggests that he was already dead long before the events of that game, although it could have been bestowed on him by Apollo in the same way that Artemis gave her blade to Kratos. Zeus has already shown that he has no trouble getting rid of people who cause him too much trouble, even if they are his own flesh and blood, so it wouldn't be a stretch to think that this was what happened. This leaves Aphrodite, who did actually show up in God of War 3, but wasn't killed by Kratos for obvious reasons. When Cory was asked about her, he replied with quite an ambiguous answer, saying that she may still be alive or she may not be, only time will tell. I think her fate was tied to the rest of Greece, so my money is on her being dead. Now there is one character from the previous games that I really hope has a cameo in the next one, and that is the boat captain who first appeared at the beginning of the original God of War. Kratos released the souls of the underworld when he killed Hades, so this could be how he comes back to life and somehow ends up in the lands of Norse mythology. Except this time, he is put in a situation where he gets rescued by Kratos instead. It would be a good way of highlighting just how much Kratos has changed, especially when you compare it to that moment in the very first game.
I didn't come back for you.
The move towards a different mythology was actually telegraphed all the way back in Ascension when the painting that depicted the death of Olympus showed what happens next. No one really knew what it meant at the time, but we kind of do now. It also explains why they put in hints that different mythologies were out there when a note spoke about the land of the pharaoh and Mjolnir showed up in Ascension's multiplayer. Kratos could also wield the power of the Ifrit after visiting the lands of Persia in Chains of Olympus. The Ifrit are these fiery supernatural creatures that come from Arabian mythology instead of Greek, so it was really the biggest and earliest clue that we had before the existence of other mythologies in parallel was confirmed. You might be wondering how different mythologies can exist at the same time when they each have their own cosmology. There are still ways to make them fit in the God of War universe. Atlas carrying the Earth on his shoulders in God of War 2 doesn't necessarily go against the way things work in the Norse world. Earth only relates to Midgard, while the other 8 realms have been portrayed as different dimensions, with the world tree Yggdrasil holding them together. This is how Marvel managed to fit in Thor in their universe, with the realms being accessible via portals and rifts. The image that revealed itself shows us Earth as it exists in the God of War universe, and underneath it reads the following: "When the Earth stops, the journey begins, with the light of the power to stop time hovering over a part of it." I have been wrestling with whether Kratos' actions only affected Greece or the entire world, but the evidence that we have so far points in the direction of the whole world being affected. Kratos moving to the lands of Norse mythology was also described as a kind of BC to AD changeover. Furthermore, in a line of dialogue with Athena, Kratos talks about the whole world standing in ruin as opposed to just Greece. He could have easily just said Greece, which further supports the notion of the whole world being affected instead. So the Norse world could have also felt the effects of what Kratos did in Greece, since he essentially disrupted the natural order of things. The journey begins part of the sentence implies that Kratos travels willingly away from the lands of Greek mythology. This is more in line with what Cory said when he talked about Kratos wandering the earth alone for an extended period of time before ending up in the Norse world. He also talked a bit about how there is precedent for the worlds of myth being connected in the Eddas. The Eddas are essentially composed of 2 literary works that act as our primary source for information on Norse mythology. It's interesting. In some of the Eddas, the Norse myths, there are references to Odin having contact with the Roman god Mars. You already see these connections forming. I think it's their way of trying to shift and connect a lot of these things. To me, it's almost a natural fit. The Greek element is just Kratos. So for all we know, Zeus might have even had contact with Odin at some point in the God of War universe. Someone also pointed out on Twitter that a Greek is seen asking Balder for the location of Odin in the Poetic Edda, which further supports this notion of different mythologies being connected.
My name's Balder. This is my brother, Thor. And to take a hit like that, you must be a god too.
Half god. I'm Hercules. I come from Greece.
Welcome to Norse land.
I really liked the theory that the Gravedigger was actually Odin keeping an eye on things in Greece for his own interest, particularly because he looked quite similar with the missing eye. This theory was debunked, however, when it was confirmed by the director of God of War 3 that the Gravedigger was Zeus, which does make more sense overall. It was also hinted that there might be more than one game planned in the Norse universe. Aldrin Tate Daniels asks, will there be a trilogy or is this a standalone story? To which Cory then says, more than one I hope, beyond that not yet certain. Natasias Gamer 24/7 also asked whether God of War will be the last game with Kratos, and he responded by saying no, more Kratos to come. So I definitely think that we'll have more than one game set in the Norse universe. Egyptian mythology could still show up down the line, but this would be much later, after a trilogy most likely, and if the team still finds themselves in a position where they want to do more. After clarifying that different mythologies are merely separated by geography and hints from Ascension pointed towards a land of the pharaoh, the door is definitely open for them to tackle other ones if they wanted to. Now that we have talked a bit about how the past games might link into this new one, I will address its actual story in the next video. There have been a few more hints since my last one that I want to discuss that haven't been covered yet. I hope you guys enjoyed this one for now, and I'll see you again very soon.